The night opens slowly, with a hush that seems to descend over the land between the rivers. The story begins not with monsters, but with stillness, the kind of quiet that invites the mind to drift backwards through time. Imagine lying beneath a soft blanket of stars, their light unchanged for thousands of years, the same stars that once shone upon ancient Sumer. This is the world we are about to enter, a land of temples and rivers, of gods and myths, of terrifying beasts whose stories have survived in whispers carved into clay. Yet tonight, they are not here to frighten, but to guide us gently into the dreamlike spaces of history, where even the most fearsome beings move slowly, almost tenderly, through the imagination. Sumer has been called the cradle of civilization, and for good reason. Long before the great empires of Greece and Rome, before even the pyramids of Egypt reached toward the desert sky, the Sumerians were building cities. They settled in the fertile crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where fields of grain and the rhythm of floods gave rise to the first great urban centers. It is here, in the ancient cities of Uruk, Ur, and Lagash, that humanity first discovered how to write down its memories. The clay tablets they left behind are not just fragments of business records or royal decrees, but also the earliest recorded myths, tales of gods, of heroes, and of beings so vast and strange that even the gods themselves sometimes trembled in their presence. These tales were not created to horrify in the way that modern stories of monsters might. Instead, they were expressions of awe. When the Sumerians spoke of beasts with many heads, of dragons born from cosmic waters, or of demons that stalked the night, they were giving shape to the overwhelming mysteries of life itself. Thunder, floods, illness, and the inevitability of death, all of these were beyond their control, and so they wrapped them in the language of myth. To us, these creatures may appear terrifying, yet to the people who told their stories, they carried meaning, lessons, and sometimes even protection. As we drift into this world together, it is worth remembering the role of the storyteller. Around the hearth or beneath the canopy of stars, the myths were shared in soft tones, their rhythms lulling listeners into that space between fear and sleep. The monsters were never just monsters, they were also metaphors for disorder, for the unknown, for the fragile balance between human beings and the forces greater than themselves. They made the invisible visible, the incomprehensible comprehensible. And in this way, they offered a strange kind of comfort. Tonight, you and I will wander through these myths at an unhurried pace. We will meet serpents coiling at the edges of the world, guardians of forests whose breath was death, bulls summoned from the heavens in divine wrath, and demons who lingered at the edges of dreams. Yet each will be approached as the Sumerians might have told them, not with the scream of panic, but with the measured cadence of ritual and story. Each creature will take its place in a larger tapestry, a world where gods and monsters walked side by side, where the line between protector and predator was never quite fixed. Let the modern world fall quiet for a while. Leave behind the hum of electricity, the pulse of hurried hours, and step slowly into the still waters of Sumerian time. In this silence, broken only by the imagined rush of the Euphrates, we can almost hear the voices of the first storytellers. They whisper of beginnings, of chaos, of battles fought in the heavens and of destinies written on tablets of clay. They whisper of beasts whose forms stir both dread and wonder. So, as your breathing steadies and your body relaxes, let your mind open to this ancient dream. We are not here to summon fear, but to wander the landscapes of myth as one might wander a quiet night garden, pausing at each turn to marvel at the shadows. The Sumerians lived their lives with these myths as constant companions. Tonight, you will do the same, drifting with them into a realm where terrifying beasts are transformed into gentle stories for sleep. And as we begin, know that each tale is not just about what frightened them, but about how they found meaning, courage, and even peace in the face of the unknown.
Long before the lights of our modern cities ever touched the horizon, there was a land shaped by two rivers that seemed to hold the secret of beginnings. This was Mesopotamia, a word meaning the land between the rivers, and at its heart lay Sumer, a region so fertile and so full of possibility that it became the stage on which human civilization first learned to take its earliest, careful steps. To imagine Sumer is to imagine a landscape both vast and intimate, the broad sweep of fields watered by canals, the winding course of the Euphrates under moonlight, and the constant presence of the Tigris, restless and unpredictable. In this cradle of abundance, humans transformed from wanderers into builders, and from simple builders into dreamers who etched their visions into clay. Sumer was not a single city, but rather a constellation of city-states, each with its own patron deity, temple, and community life. Cities like Ur, Lagash, Kish, and perhaps most famously Uruk, rose from the plain like islands of brick and stone. Their inhabitants were among the first to organize communal labor, to raise ziggurats, those towering, terraced temples that seemed to touch the heavens, and to build walls that defined the boundaries between the ordered life of the city and the wilderness beyond. Each city was its own world, a place where trade routes brought goods and stories, where scribes pressed wedges of cuneiform into damp clay, and where the gods were believed to dwell alongside their worshippers. When we think of the dawn of civilization, it is easy to picture something simple, primitive, almost fragile. Yet the Sumerians were sophisticated in ways that continue to echo across time. They developed systems of writing that allowed them to record not only inventories and contracts but also the earliest poetry. They devised legal codes to govern their societies, and they observed the heavens, creating calendars that shaped the rhythms of agriculture and ritual. All of this blossomed in the shadow of their myths, for in Sumer, the divine was never far from the ordinary. Every act of daily life, planting seeds, building canals, baking bread, was entwined with a larger cosmic order maintained by the gods. But it was not always an order of peace. The rivers that gave Sumer life were also sources of danger, their floods capable of sweeping away entire harvests. The open plains made the cities vulnerable to invasion, and the climate demanded constant innovation to survive. These challenges were not merely practical struggles, they became part of the stories the Sumerians told themselves. To live in Sumer was to live with the sense that the balance between chaos and order was delicate, and that balance was mirrored in the myths of terrifying beasts who embodied both fear and meaning. Imagine the scene, a Sumerian farmer walking home at dusk, passing the walls of Uruk. Beyond the safety of the city gates stretched the unknown, the wild forests, the deserts, the mountains from which enemies or storms might come. Inside the city, there was the ziggurat, where priests offered rituals to ensure divine favor. The farmer's life was framed by both realities, the secure and the perilous, the known and the unknown. Mythology became the language to bridge these worlds, giving form to the forces of nature and fate that could not otherwise be controlled. A storm was not just wind and rain, it could be the breath of a monstrous creature unleashed from the heavens. A drought was not merely a failed season but the work of an angry deity or the presence of demons from the underworld. Uruk itself was more than a city, it was a legend. Later remembered as the home of Gilgamesh, one of the most enduring mythic figures in history, Uruk stood as a symbol of human ambition and divine connection. The Epic of Gilgamesh, which would be preserved and retold long after Sumer's cities had fallen to ruin, spoke not just of kings and heroes but also of encounters with strange beings, guardians of forests, and celestial beasts. It was a reminder that civilization's shining walls were always built against the backdrop of something more ancient, wilder, and untamed. For the Sumerians, the terrifying beasts of myth were not confined to stories told in the quiet of night. They were woven into the very fabric of city life. Reliefs carved into walls showed dragons and serpents. Amulets and protective charms bore images of demons and monstrous guardians, invoked not to frighten but to ward off harm. Even the gates of Babylon, which would later inherit Sumer's traditions, were adorned with depictions of Mushusu, a fearsome dragon that signaled both terror and protection. In this way, the line between everyday life and mythological imagination blurred, until the two could not easily be separated. The birth of civilization, then, was not simply the invention of writing or the construction of monumental architecture. It was also the birth of stories, stories that allowed human beings to understand their place in a world that was as nurturing as it was dangerous. When the Sumerians built their cities, they were not just arranging mud brick structures, they were arranging symbols of stability in the face of uncertainty. When they recorded myths on tablets, they were not merely entertaining themselves. They were creating a mirror through which they could see their own fears, hopes, and aspirations. And so, as we linger in this land between the rivers, we begin to feel the rhythm of life in ancient Sumer. It is a rhythm of opposites, light and dark, order and chaos, city and wilderness, life and death. Out of this tension, myths of terrifying beasts emerged, not as distractions, but as essential companions to the Sumerians' daily lives. These creatures embodied the unpredictable forces that surrounded them, and in doing so, gave people a way to face the unknown with reverence, with caution, and perhaps even with peace. This is the birthplace of our journey, the soil from which the first myths of monsters would grow. From the fertile land of Sumer came not only the world's first civilizations but also some of humanity's earliest attempts to explain fear through story. And in the quiet telling of those stories, we find not only the terrors of the ancient world but also its deep and enduring beauty.
Mythology, in the world of the Sumerians, was never an idle pastime or a collection of fanciful tales to pass the hours. It was the very fabric of life, a way of explaining what could not be controlled and of finding patterns in a world that often seemed vast, unpredictable, and overwhelming. To live in Sumer was to live in close contact with forces of nature, floods that could sweep away fields in a single night, droughts that left the land cracked and barren, storms that darkened the skies and seemed to roar with an almost conscious will. The myths gave voice to these forces, turning them into beings that could be named, described, and in some sense, understood. In this way, mythology was less about fear itself, and more about providing a comforting structure for it. Every aspect of daily life was tied to the divine, and the Sumerians did not make a sharp division between sacred and ordinary. A farmer sowing seeds might whisper a prayer to a deity of fertility. A family sharing bread might recall that grain was a gift from the gods, and that the oven's warmth reflected the sun's life-giving fire. When illness struck, people spoke not only of infection or injury, but of demons or spirits that had entered the body. Mythology explained not only what was happening, but also why it was happening, giving meaning to both joys and tragedies. The myths themselves often centered on the relationship between humans and the gods, a relationship marked by dependence, reverence, and sometimes unease. The gods were not gentle overseers but powerful beings who required offerings and respect. They were capable of blessing the cities with abundance, but just as capable of withdrawing their favor, sending disasters, or allowing monstrous creatures to rise from the unknown depths of the cosmos. To the Sumerian mind, these stories reflected the fragile balance of life, a balance that could tilt at any moment. One of the most important roles of mythology was to transform the uncontrollable into something familiar. By giving storms the face of a lion-headed bird or imagining disease as the work of a demon with claws and wings, the Sumerians could interact with these fears in ritual and story. They could craft protective amulets, recite incantations, and perform ceremonies designed to ward off such threats. By doing so, they were no longer helpless before the unknown. They were participants in a larger cosmic drama. The terrifying became manageable when wrapped in narrative. Communal storytelling also played a vital role. At temples and in households, myths were shared aloud, often with ritual recitations or chants. These were not hurried performances but deliberate, rhythmic tellings that could last into the night. In this setting, the myths became more than entertainment. They were a form of meditation, of binding the community together through shared understanding. Listeners were not meant to sit in suspense as in modern tales of horror, but to settle into the slow cadence of repetition, to let the images of gods and monsters drift into their minds like dreams. The stories soothed even as they described beings of immense power, because they reminded everyone that these forces, however fearsome, were part of a larger order. The Sumerians also believed that myths held practical power. Words themselves were seen as sacred, capable of shaping reality. To tell the story of a monster was not merely to describe it, but in a way to engage with it, to contain it within the boundaries of narrative. For this reason, mythology was deeply intertwined with ritual. A myth about a river god's anger might be recited during a flood, as though the telling could influence the waters. A tale of a protective deity might be repeated before battle, as if the story itself called the god into the present moment. Mythology was not separate from life but a tool for living it. It is also important to remember that these myths existed in a society where the written word was only just being born. Cuneiform tablets recorded many of these tales, but before writing, they were passed down by memory, by the steady voice of one generation speaking to the next. There is a calming quality in imagining this: families gathered, the night sky above, the storyteller's voice carrying through the warm air as the city walls stood against the dark. In such moments, myth was as essential as food or water, nourishing the soul as the fields nourished the body. And at the heart of many myths were the beasts, those terrifying creatures that embodied chaos and mystery. They were not random inventions but reflections of the natural world's unpredictability. The serpent might recall the twisting of rivers or the danger of venomous snakes. The bull might represent both the fertility of the fields and the destructive power of a storm. Each beast was layered with meaning, a living symbol that explained, warned, and comforted all at once. In this way, mythology gave the Sumerians a language not only to express their fears but to transform them into something enduring. For the modern listener, it is easy to see only the terror in these stories, the dragons, the demons, the monstrous guardians. But when we step gently into the mindset of the Sumerians, we find something subtler. Their myths were not meant to frighten to the point of despair, they were meant to soothe by giving fear a place, a role, and a story. When the Sumerians heard of a demon or a monstrous bird, they were reminded not of chaos alone, but of the eternal dance between order and disorder, life and death, gods and mortals. This is why mythology was the heart of Sumerian life. It was their way of watching the sky and the rivers, of facing the uncertainty of harvests, of making peace with the inevitability of mortality. Each tale carried within it the wisdom of generations who had learned to live with forces larger than themselves. And as these stories lulled listeners into the comfort of familiarity, they also prepared them for the unpredictability of tomorrow. In the soft rhythm of Sumerian storytelling, mythology was both shield and lullaby. It acknowledged the terror of the world but wrapped it in words that calmed the spirit. And so, when we step into these myths today, we can find not only echoes of fear, but also the same quiet comfort that ancient listeners must have felt, the reassurance that even in the face of chaos, there is meaning, and that meaning can be carried in the simple act of telling a story. In the beginning, before the cities of Sumer stood tall upon the plains, before kings and scribes etched their marks into clay, the Sumerians imagined a vast and restless sea. This sea was not merely water, not simply the life-giving rivers that sustained their fields, but something deeper and older, a cosmic ocean, unformed and endless. Out of this primeval expanse emerged Tiamat, a being both mother and monster, the embodiment of chaos in its earliest form. To speak of Tiamat is to speak of beginnings, for she was not only the first terrifying beast but also the womb of creation itself. Tiamat's presence in myth is immense, though she is often remembered through later retellings in Babylonian tradition, particularly in the Enuma Elish. Yet her roots stretch back to the Sumerian imagination, where chaos was always present at the edges of order. Tiamat was envisioned as a vast dragon or serpent, a creature whose body seemed to stretch as far as the horizon, coils upon coils rising out of the waters. She was at once awe-inspiring and dreadful, her form a reminder of the primal unknown from which everything else had been born. For the people of Mesopotamia, water was life, but it was also threat. The flooding of rivers could bring fertility or destruction, and in this tension lay the essence of Tiamat. Her story begins with creation itself. Out of the mingling of fresh waters and salt waters, the gods were born. But as the generations of gods multiplied, they became restless, noisy, and disobedient. Their clamor disturbed the quiet of Tiamat's waters, and in her growing wrath, she transformed from mother to adversary. With her partner Anzu destroyed by the younger gods, Tiamat gathered monstrous beings to her side, dragons, serpents, scorpion men, and other terrifying creatures that embodied the wildest fears of the Mesopotamian imagination. Together they formed an army of chaos, rising up against the divine order. In this transformation, Tiamat reveals one of the profound truths of mythology: creation and destruction are never far apart. The same waters that give birth can also overwhelm. The same mother who nurtures can also rage. For the Sumerians and later the Babylonians, Tiamat was the perfect symbol of this duality. She was not an evil presence in the way later traditions would frame monsters. Rather, she was necessary chaos, the untamed energy without which there could be no life, but which also had to be confronted if life was to continue. The tale of her defeat centers on the god Marduk, who rose from among the younger gods to challenge her. Armed with a net, a bow, and a great club, Marduk confronted Tiamat in a battle that was both cosmic and deeply symbolic. In the calm retelling of this story, one can almost see the two forces circling one another, chaos in the form of the dragon mother, and order in the form of the young warrior god. Their clash was more than just a struggle of beings, it was the shaping of the universe itself. Marduk cast his net to trap Tiamat, drawing her into battle. With his bow he shot an arrow that pierced her heart, and with his club he crushed her body. Yet her defeat was not an end but a beginning. From her vast, broken form, the world was created. One half of her body became the sky, stretched out above, while the other half formed the land below. From her eyes flowed the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, the lifeblood of Mesopotamia. Her monstrous death became the foundation of life itself, the very geography upon which the Sumerians built their cities. For the people who heard this story, the image of Tiamat was not one of senseless terror. She was terrifying, yes, but she was also essential. In her destruction lay creation, in her chaos lay the seeds of order. To fall asleep hearing her story would not have been to invite nightmares, but to be lulled by the idea that even the most frightening forces of existence could be transformed into something life-giving. The world was not born in silence or serenity, but out of a storm, and yet from that storm came the stability of earth and sky. The monsters she created alongside her were no less significant. Each one represented the anxieties of the Sumerians, serpents that recalled the lurking dangers of the rivers, scorpion men that echoed the stings of desert life, and great lions or dragons that embodied untamable wilderness. Together, they were Tiamat's children, her army of disorder. When Marduk defeated them, he did not annihilate them entirely. Their images lived on, carved into temples, carried in charms, whispered of in rituals. Even subdued, chaos was never entirely absent. It lingered at the edge of memory, reminding humanity that balance must always be guarded. There is also a quieter dimension to Tiamat's story, one that speaks directly to the heart of bedtime storytelling. In imagining her, the Sumerians were acknowledging the vastness of the unknown. When they looked at the horizon and saw only water, when they felt the trembling of storms across the plains, they were brushing against Tiamat's presence. To tell her story was to make peace with that presence, to give it form and boundaries, so that fear could be folded into the comfort of myth. For the listener today, Tiamat's tale resonates with the same rhythm. She is the storm before calm, the chaos before order, the shadow that gives meaning to light. Her dragon form coils across the sky like a dream, not to awaken terror but to remind us of the grandeur of beginnings. The Sumerians did not seek to banish her completely, they understood that life without chaos would be lifeless. Instead, they told and retold her story, allowing her to live on in words, her presence softened by ritual cadence and the passage of time. And so, as we move gently from the story of Tiamat into the many beasts that followed her, we carry with us this lesson, that the terrifying is not always to be avoided. Sometimes, it is to be embraced, transformed, and remembered as part of the larger story of existence. Tiamat may be gone, her body stretched across the world as earth and sky, but her spirit lingers in every myth that dares to describe the meeting of chaos and order. In her, the Sumerians found both their deepest fears and their most enduring source of meaning. The next of the great and terrifying beings to emerge from Sumerian and later Mesopotamian myth is the Anzu bird, a creature as strange as it is symbolic. Unlike Tiamat, who embodied the vastness of primordial chaos, the Anzu bird represented something more focused, a threat not only to divine order but to the very foundation upon which the cosmos was believed to rest. Descriptions of Anzu place him somewhere between bird and lion, a hybrid being with the wings and feathers of an eagle but the head, teeth, and ferocity of a great lion. In his strange form, the Sumerians saw both the majesty of the sky and the danger of wild beasts on the ground, fused into a single embodiment of awe and terror. The story of Anzu is centered on an act of theft, one of the most audacious in all mythology. Among the gods there existed a sacred object, the Tablet of Destinies. This was no ordinary artifact. Upon it was written the structure of the universe itself, the decrees of the gods, the laws that held the cosmos together. To possess the Tablet of Destinies was to control the very order of reality, for whoever held it could command the fates of gods and mortals alike. It was both a physical object and a powerful symbol of stability and justice. Anzu, though originally a servant to the gods, was seized by desire and ambition. In a moment of daring, he stole the Tablet of Destinies from the great god Enlil and fled into the mountains. With this act, he unbalanced the cosmos. The Sumerians would have imagined the heavens themselves shuddering as the divine order faltered, for without the tablet, decrees could not be issued, rituals lost their power, and the delicate balance between chaos and order was broken. It was a theft not of gold or treasure, but of meaning itself, and it plunged the divine realm into a state of unease. The gods were alarmed, for none could act without the authority of the tablet. The world teetered on the brink of collapse. In this crisis, one among them had to rise to challenge Anzu and restore what was lost. The task eventually fell to Ninurta, a warrior god associated with the hunt, with storms, and with agricultural fertility. Ninurta's choice as champion was fitting, for he embodied both strength and renewal, the power to destroy and the ability to cultivate. His role in defeating Anzu would not only restore order but also remind the world that disruption, however frightening, could be overcome by courage and resolve. The battle between Ninurta and Anzu is often described with imagery that is both vivid and dreamlike. Anzu, perched upon the cliffs of a mountain, clutched the Tablet of Destinies as if it were his heart. His wings spread wide, blotting out the sun, casting shadows across the land below. The gods watched anxiously as Ninurta approached, armed with bow, arrows, and his unshakable determination. The clash between them was no ordinary combat, it was a struggle for the very rhythm of the universe. In some versions of the tale, Ninurta falters at first, intimidated by Anzu's power. The bird-lion hybrid unleashed winds and storms from his wings, scattering arrows and shaking the very mountains. Yet through persistence and divine aid, Ninurta pressed on. Eventually, with a final, decisive blow, he brought Anzu down, reclaiming the Tablet of Destinies. With its return, the cosmos settled once more, and order was restored. The gods could breathe again, and life could resume its steady pace. For the Sumerians, this myth would have carried profound significance. At its heart, it is a story about what happens when order is disrupted. The theft of the tablet was not just a thrilling tale but a metaphor for the fragility of balance. Just as floods could sweep away fields overnight or enemies could threaten the walls of a city, so too could the cosmic order itself feel vulnerable. Yet the defeat of Anzu offered reassurance. Balance could be restored, chaos could be contained, and life would continue. The Anzu bird also reveals something about the Sumerian relationship with the natural world. Eagles and lions were both awe-inspiring creatures, symbols of power, freedom, and danger. To merge them into a single being was to magnify their qualities, to create a creature that commanded respect. But unlike ordinary beasts, Anzu did not merely live in forests or mountains. He dared to interfere with the divine order itself. His theft made him more than an animal. It made him a cosmic rebel, one whose ambition disrupted even the gods. There is also a gentle paradox in the myth. While Anzu was terrifying, he was also essential to the story. Without his theft, there would have been no crisis, and without the crisis, no demonstration of courage, no restoration of harmony. In this sense, Anzu was both destroyer and catalyst, a creature whose defiance ultimately allowed balance to be reaffirmed. The Sumerians, living in a world of constant uncertainty, may have found comfort in this lesson. Even when the order of life is disrupted, renewal can follow. For the listener today, the story of Anzu is less about the violence of battle and more about the rhythm of disruption and restoration. His wings beating against the sky can be imagined not as a nightmare, but as a storm passing overhead, loud, overwhelming, but temporary. Ninurta's persistence is the calm after the storm, the reminder that no matter how powerful the forces of disruption may seem, they will always yield to the steady return of order. Thus, the Anzu bird holds his place among the terrifying beasts of Mesopotamian mythology. Not a mindless monster, but a figure who teaches that the order of the world is precious and fragile. His theft of the Tablet of Destinies was a bold act, a challenge to the structure of existence itself. Yet in the telling of his defeat, the Sumerians found reassurance. The world may tremble, the heavens may darken, but balance will return. And as the story was told in calm tones beneath the Sumerian sky, listeners could close their eyes knowing that chaos, however frightening, was always temporary.
Deep within the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving stories in human history, lies the figure of Humbaba, sometimes called Huwawa, the fearsome guardian of the cedar forest. While not as cosmic in scope as Tiamat or as rebellious as the Anzu bird, Humbaba's tale carries a different weight. He is not a being who sought to unmake the universe, nor one who tried to steal divine authority. Instead, he represents the untamed wilderness itself, a reminder of the dangers that awaited beyond the boundaries of civilization. To the Sumerians and their successors, Humbaba was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, a beast who stood watch over the most sacred of groves, the cedar forest, which was believed to lie at the edge of the known world. Humbaba was described as a monstrous giant, a creature whose very presence could unsettle the heart. The myths vary in their details, but many accounts portray him as having a face like that of a lion, skin tough as armor, and a roar like rushing waters. In some versions, his features are even stranger, with the ability to breathe fire or unleash storms, or with a visage so grotesque that it twisted into something almost inhuman. His eyes were said to shine with an otherworldly brilliance, and his voice thundered like the deep earth itself. All of these descriptions combined to make him less of a simple beast and more of a living embodiment of nature's untamed ferocity. The cedar forest itself was sacred. To the Sumerians and later Babylonians, cedar wood was not only valuable but symbolic. Cedars were majestic, towering trees that stretched high into the heavens, a rare and treasured sight in the landscapes of Mesopotamia. To imagine a vast forest filled with them was to dream of something divine, a space both abundant and dangerous. Humbaba's role was to guard this domain, not out of personal malice, but because the gods had appointed him protector. In particular, it was the great god Enlil who had set him over the forest, giving him 7 layers of terrifying auras, described sometimes as radiances, that surrounded him like invisible armor. These auras were so powerful that even the bravest warrior might be struck with fear before daring to confront him. The encounter with Humbaba comes in the story of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, and his companion Enkidu. Gilgamesh, restless and ambitious, sought to achieve lasting fame. He desired to cut down the cedars and bring them back to his city, using them for great works of construction and glory. But to do this, he would have to face Humbaba. The journey into the cedar forest was not merely a physical quest but also a symbolic crossing from the safety of human civilization into the domain of the unknown. The people of Mesopotamia understood that beyond their irrigated fields and carefully built walls lay deserts, mountains, and wild forests, all places filled with dangers they could not fully master. Humbaba was the personification of this danger, a reminder that nature could not easily be subdued. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu approached Humbaba, the atmosphere of the tale shifts into one of mounting tension. The beast roared, and the ground shook beneath him. His 7 auras radiated out like invisible waves of dread, pressing down upon the 2 heroes. It was not a confrontation to be taken lightly. Yet with courage, and, importantly, with the aid of the sun god Shamash, they pressed forward. The winds sent by Shamash pinned Humbaba in place, weakening his defenses. This divine intervention suggests that no mortal, however brave, could have defeated Humbaba alone. Even Gilgamesh, the semi-divine king, required the aid of the gods to overcome the guardian. When Humbaba fell, his defeat was not simply the death of a monster. In the quiet moments after his capture, Humbaba pleaded for mercy. He promised to serve Gilgamesh as his vassal, to cut down the cedars for him and to be his loyal servant. There is a haunting humanity in this plea. For a moment, Humbaba ceases to be only a terrifying beast and becomes a figure of tragedy. He is caught between his role as guardian, appointed by the gods, and his instinct to survive. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu refused. They saw in his words not sincerity but a trick, and with Shamash's encouragement, they struck him down. The death of Humbaba is one of the most memorable episodes in Mesopotamian literature because it raises profound questions. Was Humbaba truly a monster, or was he simply fulfilling the duty given to him? Was Gilgamesh's quest heroic, or was it an act of arrogance, the destruction of something sacred for personal glory? The cedar forest, once protected by its guardian, was now vulnerable to human exploitation. This ambivalence would have lingered in the minds of those who told and retold the story. For the listener today, Humbaba can be seen less as a villain and more as a figure of the wilderness. His terrifying aura can be imagined as the deep hush of an ancient forest, the kind of silence that makes one feel both small and overwhelmed. His roars echo like distant thunder rolling across valleys, his presence like the weight of untamed nature pressing on human ambition. Gilgamesh's victory is not without consequence, for though it brought him glory, it also foreshadowed the tragedies that would follow in his life, including the death of Enkidu. In the calm flow of storytelling, Humbaba becomes less of a monster to be feared and more of a guardian who reminds us of the balance between humanity and the natural world. He is terrifying because he represents the unknown, but he is also noble because he protects what is sacred. His defeat tells us that human ambition is powerful, but it also suggests that ambition comes with a cost. The Sumerians understood that conquering the wilderness was never simple, it meant both triumph and loss. As the story of Humbaba is told in soft tones, one can almost imagine walking beneath the cedars, their fragrance in the air, the sunlight filtering through high branches. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a giant watches with glowing eyes, his breath stirring the leaves, his aura heavy with the power of the gods. For a moment, the listener might feel that quiet shiver of awe, a reminder that nature, in all its beauty and terror, has always demanded respect.
The next of the terrifying beasts in Sumerian and Mesopotamian mythology is one that is both cosmic in scale and deeply personal in its story, the Bull of Heaven. Unlike Humbaba, who stood guard over the forests, or Anzu, who sought divine power, the Bull of Heaven was a weapon of wrath, unleashed by a goddess to punish a mortal king. His tale is most vividly told in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and though he appears only briefly, his role is crucial, symbolizing the raw, overwhelming power of divine retribution and the fragile boundary between human pride and divine authority. The story begins after Gilgamesh and Enkidu have achieved great victories, including their triumph over Humbaba. Their fame grows, and Gilgamesh's strength becomes the subject of admiration and fear alike. Among those who notice him is the goddess Ishtar, the powerful and unpredictable goddess of love, fertility, and war. Ishtar, captivated by Gilgamesh's beauty and prowess, approaches him with an offer. She wishes to be his lover, to share her divine gifts with him. In other stories, such a proposal might be seen as an honor, but Gilgamesh does not see it this way. Instead, Gilgamesh rejects Ishtar with sharp words, mocking her history with lovers. He recounts how each of her past loves ended in suffering, how she harmed or destroyed those who came under her sway. He refuses her advances, scorning her power and humiliating her in the process. For a goddess as revered and as feared as Ishtar, such rejection is not merely personal but cosmic. Enraged, she ascends to the heavens to seek vengeance. It is then that she demands the release of the Bull of Heaven, a divine beast so powerful that its very descent upon the earth brings famine, chaos, and death. The bull is not simply an animal but a cosmic force, an embodiment of celestial power. Its hooves churn the earth, its breath withers crops, and its roars shake the land. To unleash the Bull of Heaven is to send catastrophe itself into the world of mortals. The gods hesitate, but Ishtar's wrath is fierce, and ultimately, her demand is granted. The bull is loosed upon the city of Uruk. The arrival of the bull is described with imagery both terrifying and grand. As it charges, the ground splits open, swallowing hundreds of men. Its very movements leave devastation in their wake. For the people of Uruk, the bull's appearance is not just an attack, it is a divine judgment, a punishment for their king's arrogance and defiance of the goddess. To face the Bull of Heaven is not to face a mere beast, but to confront the anger of the heavens themselves. Yet Gilgamesh and Enkidu do not cower. Together, the two companions step forward to meet the divine beast. Their confrontation with the bull is one of the most dramatic moments in Mesopotamian myth, a clash of mortal bravery against celestial wrath. Enkidu seizes the bull by its great horns, holding it in place with the strength of his wild-born nature, while Gilgamesh drives his weapon into the beast, striking it down. With their combined might, they accomplish the unthinkable, they kill the Bull of Heaven. The aftermath of this victory, however, is as important as the battle itself. For though they triumphed, their act of slaying the bull is seen by the gods as a grave transgression. To kill such a creature is not only to defy Ishtar but to disturb the balance between mortals and the divine. In the great council of the gods, a decision is made. One of the two heroes must die as punishment for their arrogance. It is Enkidu who is chosen, and his death marks the beginning of Gilgamesh's long and painful journey to confront his own mortality. The Bull of Heaven, then, is more than a beast. He is a catalyst. His appearance triggers the turning point of the Epic of Gilgamesh, shifting the story from adventures of glory to meditations on grief, loss, and the limits of human life. Without the bull, there would be no death of Enkidu, and without that death, Gilgamesh would never have embarked on his quest for immortality. The bull embodies the cost of defiance, the inescapable consequence of standing against the gods. Symbolically, the Bull of Heaven also resonates with deep cultural imagery. To the Mesopotamians, the bull was a creature of immense power, tied to fertility and agriculture. Bulls plowed the earth, sustained communities, and symbolized strength. Yet here, the bull is not a nurturing presence but a destructive one, its energy turned against the world it might otherwise have sustained. The reversal makes the Bull of Heaven doubly terrifying, for it takes what is usually a symbol of life and abundance and transforms it into an instrument of divine destruction. For listeners hearing this tale by firelight or beneath the stars, the bull's story would have struck a chord. His fury might echo the storms that destroyed crops or the sudden disasters that ruined a year's labor. His death, though celebrated, carried a shadow, reminding all that the gods' gifts could quickly turn to wrath. Told in calm tones, the image of the Bull of Heaven can shift from terror to reflection. Imagine his hooves pounding the ground like a great drumbeat, his breath steaming in the cool night air, his eyes glowing with otherworldly fire. For a moment, he seems unstoppable, an overwhelming force bearing down upon the world. And then, as the story unfolds, his strength falters under the combined resolve of Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Even the mightiest forces, the tale whispers, can be overcome, but not without consequence. In the stillness after the bull's fall, the story reminds us that every act of defiance, every surge of human pride, carries its price. The Bull of Heaven may be slain, but his presence lingers in the grief that follows, shaping the destiny of heroes and the lessons of generations. He is a beast not remembered for his own character but for the transformation his coming brings. In this way, the Bull of Heaven stands as one of the most haunting figures in Mesopotamian mythology, a beast whose terror lies not just in his charge, but in the chain of fate he sets in motion. Among the strange and fearsome beings of Sumerian and Mesopotamian myth, there are creatures that feel less like individuals with defined personalities and more like dreamlike visions of terror, hybrids and serpentine monsters that stretch the imagination of ancient storytellers. One of the most evocative of these is the seven-headed serpent, a being referenced in fragments of myth and remembered as one of the foes defeated by Ninurta, the warrior god. Unlike Tiamat, who birthed chaos, or the Bull of Heaven, who descended with divine wrath, the seven-headed serpent embodies the primal fear of multiplicity, the horror of something that cannot be subdued by a single blow. To face one serpent is already a test of courage, but to confront seven heads upon one body is to stare into the very embodiment of relentless danger. In the stories where the serpent appears, it is not given much dialogue or personality. Instead, it exists as a challenge, a force to be overcome in the cosmic battles between gods and monsters. Ninurta, who was already celebrated for defeating Anzu and restoring the Tablet of Destinies, is often credited with slaying the serpent. His role as the divine champion was to put down threats that unsettled the cosmic order, and the seven-headed serpent was among the most menacing of those threats. The imagery of the beast, though only briefly described in surviving texts, speaks volumes. Its body was vast, its seven heads twisting and turning in every direction, each one a separate danger, each one striking with venomous intent. To defeat it was to overcome not just one challenge but seven simultaneous perils. The serpent appears as part of a larger pattern in Mesopotamian myth, the theme of monstrous hybrids that combine familiar creatures into forms that are both awe-inspiring and dreadful. Where the Anzu bird was lion and eagle, and Humbaba was part human, part giant, and part elemental force, the serpent was not only reptilian but multiplied in its danger. Multiplicity was a common motif of terror in ancient storytelling. A single lion could be killed, a single snake could be outwitted. But when the beast was multiplied, when seven mouths snapped and seven sets of eyes glowed, The foe seemed overwhelming, almost invincible. The serpent's 7 heads echo the number's sacred quality in Mesopotamian culture. 7 often symbolized completeness, totality, or cosmic order. To give the serpent 7 heads was to make it a complete embodiment of destructive force. Ninurta's battle with the 7-headed serpent was not just an act of violence but a reaffirmation of cosmic balance. In striking down the creature, he did more than slay a beast, he symbolically shattered the chaos of multiplicity, proving that even overwhelming danger could be faced. This act reinforced his role as a god of strength, law, and renewal. The victory became part of his identity, carved into myths and hymns that praised him as the champion who brought peace to the land. For the ancient listener, the story of such a serpent would have conjured vivid images. Serpents were already creatures of fear and fascination. They could strike swiftly, their venom bringing death with little warning. They could shed their skins, seemingly reborn, mysterious in their cycles. To imagine not one snake, but 7 fused together into a single monster, would have magnified these fears beyond comprehension. The writhing of its necks, the snapping of its jaws, the slithering of its immense body, such imagery was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Yet in the calming retelling for sleep, the serpent takes on a gentler rhythm. Its 7 heads can be imagined not as snapping jaws but as waves upon a sea, rising and falling in an endless cycle. Ninurta, with calm determination, faces each head in turn, his resolve unwavering. The battle, in this softened vision, is less about violence and more about persistence, the steady rhythm of overcoming many challenges, one after another, until balance is restored. The serpent, then, becomes not only a monster but a symbol of endurance, teaching that no matter how many difficulties arise, each can be faced in turn. Other hybrid beasts in Mesopotamian mythology extend this theme of strange combinations. There are mentions of lions with eagle wings, dragons with bodies like serpents and scales like armor, and horned creatures that defy easy description. These beings often populated the edges of the world, guarding sacred places or serving as foes for divine heroes. They were, in many ways, the embodiment of the unknown, the kinds of creatures one might imagine dwelling in mountains never climbed or rivers that vanished into dark caverns. By giving form to these fears, the myths allowed people to name them, to hear of their defeat, and to find comfort in the idea that chaos could be mastered. The 7-headed serpent in particular carries echoes that would travel far beyond Mesopotamia. Later cultures across the Near East and beyond would tell stories of multi-headed dragons or hydras, creatures that could not easily be destroyed because each head struck with independent fury. The Sumerian image of a 7-headed monster may be among the earliest seeds of that motif, a vision so powerful it endured for millennia in human imagination. In its calm retelling, the serpent's defeat is not frightening but soothing. Imagine the many heads swaying slowly, like reeds in the wind, their movements rhythmic rather than threatening. Ninurta approaches with patience, his strength steady and assured. One by one, the serpent's heads grow quiet, the chaos calms, and at last the great body of the beast lies still, as the waters of a river settle after a storm. The story ends not in terror but in peace, reminding the listener that even the greatest threats, when faced with courage, eventually give way to stillness. Thus, the 7-headed serpent and its kin among hybrid beasts take their place in the vast tapestry of Mesopotamian mythology. They are not as famous as Tiamat or as central as the Bull of Heaven, but their role is no less important. They remind us of the human need to give shape to the unknown, to face it through story, and to find reassurance in its defeat. These creatures whisper of dangers beyond the horizon, but they also teach that every danger, no matter how many heads it wears, can be endured and overcome. Among the strange and haunting figures of Mesopotamian mythology, few are as vividly unsettling as the scorpion men, beings who combine the upper body of a human with the lower form of a giant scorpion. Unlike the 7-headed serpent or the Bull of Heaven, which embodied raw destructive force, the scorpion men were guardians, stationed at the very threshold of the underworld. They appear most memorably in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the hero encounters them at the gates of Marshu, a mountain said to mark the entrance to realms beyond human reach. These beings are not monsters in the ordinary sense. They do not charge into battle or wreak havoc upon the earth. Instead, they inspire terror through their mere presence, a reminder of boundaries that mortals are not meant to cross. The descriptions of the scorpion men are both fascinating and unnerving. Their torsos are those of men, with broad shoulders and powerful arms, but from the waist down, their bodies extend into the segmented armor and lethal stinger of a scorpion. Their gaze alone was said to be deadly. Anyone who dared look upon them without permission might be struck down instantly. They are beings of liminality, half human, half insect, and stationed at the border between life and death, day and night, safety and danger. The mountains they guard were imagined as vast and shadowy, their twin peaks touching both heaven and the underworld, with the scorpion men positioned like eternal sentinels at the gate. When Gilgamesh, grieving after the death of Enkidu, comes to Marshu, his purpose is not conquest but a desperate search for immortality. The scorpion men see him approach, and the texts describe their size as colossal, their heads brushing the heavens while their feet stand firmly in the underworld. This detail underscores their nature as boundary crossers. They exist in both realms simultaneously, embodying the idea of guardians who straddle two worlds. For Gilgamesh, the encounter is intimidating. Yet unlike many other beasts of Mesopotamian myth, the scorpion men do not immediately attack. They speak, questioning Gilgamesh's purpose, warning him of the dangers that lie beyond. Their words carry weight, for they know what lies ahead, darkness so deep that no mortal should endure it, and paths that wind into realms untouched by the sun. The presence of these beings reflects the Mesopotamian worldview in profound ways. The underworld was not imagined as a place of fire or torment, but rather as a shadowy, dust-filled existence where all the dead eventually gathered. It was separated from the world of the living by gates and barriers, and guardians like the scorpion men stood to ensure that boundaries were respected. Their terrifying forms served as warnings. The realms of gods and the dead were not places for mortals to wander. Yet in myth, it was precisely these boundaries that heroes like Gilgamesh dared to approach. There is a symbolic resonance in their scorpion form. Scorpions were common in the Mesopotamian landscape, creatures both feared and respected. Their sting was painful, sometimes deadly, a reminder of the hidden dangers of the natural world. By fusing the scorpion with the human, mythmakers created a guardian whose very body conveyed the idea of peril and vigilance. The human half could speak and reason, while the scorpion half embodied silent, instinctive danger. Together, they made a figure that was both approachable and terrifying, a being that could converse with Gilgamesh, yet could also end his life in an instant. For the ancient audience, the story of the scorpion men would have conjured images of vast gates at the end of the world, guarded by figures too strange and powerful to be challenged. They are less about conflict and more about awe, evoking the feeling of standing at a boundary one should not cross. In their presence, Gilgamesh's desperation is highlighted. He dares to ask passage through places no mortal was meant to tread. The scorpion men, recognizing his part divine nature and the depth of his grief, eventually permit him to enter, though not without warning him of the peril ahead. Their decision is less a granting of favor than an acknowledgement of fate. Gilgamesh must face the darkness, and the guardians can only stand aside. Told in gentle tones for bedtime, the scorpion men become figures of solemn majesty rather than horror. Their towering forms can be imagined as statues carved into the mountainside, their scorpion tails curling silently behind them, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of dawn and dusk. They do not move aggressively, but stand in eternal watch, their stillness as imposing as the mountains themselves. Their conversation with Gilgamesh can be heard not as a threat but as a low, resonant warning, the kind of voice that reminds one of the importance of boundaries and the wisdom of respecting them. The role of the scorpion men extends beyond myth into symbolism. They remind us that there are thresholds in life that cannot be easily crossed, and that some gates exist not to be opened but to be acknowledged with reverence. For the Mesopotamians, this was a spiritual truth, but for modern listeners, it may carry a quieter meaning, that some mysteries, whether of death, dreams, or the vastness of the cosmos, are best approached with humility. Thus, the scorpion men stand in mythology not as villains to be defeated but as eternal guardians, marking the place where human ambition meets divine boundary. Their strangeness lingers in the imagination, both terrifying and calming, a reminder of the mysteries that lie beyond the horizon. And in the stillness of storytelling, as their forms loom quietly in the mind, One can feel the hush of standing at a threshold, aware of something immense, yet soothed by the knowledge that these guardians watch over the passage with unwavering vigilance. Among the most striking passages in Mesopotamian myth comes from the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. Here, the goddess Tiamat, embodiment of the primordial sea, wages war against the younger gods who have disrupted her ancient order. To prepare for battle, she summons a terrifying host of creatures, each more bizarre and dreadful than the last. This monstrous army was not just a collection of frightening beasts, it represented the chaos of unshaped creation itself, a world before the order of gods and humans, before the division of land and sky. The imagery of Tiamat's forces echoes through later mythologies, a reminder of the deep-rooted human fascination with monstrous hybrids and the struggle between order and chaos. The texts describe Tiamat as fashioning an army of 11 terrifying monsters. These beings were not random creations but carefully designed embodiments of the untamed forces of nature. Among them were horned serpents, with scales like armor and venom potent enough to fell gods. There were dragons, with wings beating like storms and mouths that spat fire or poisoned breath. Wild dogs, furious and untamable, charged with snapping jaws and glowing eyes. Great lions too were formed, but not ordinary lions. These were creatures of exaggerated size and ferocity, their roars echoing like thunderclaps. Alongside them were scorpion men, fishmen, and mighty beings whose forms blurred the boundaries of familiar creatures, making them all the more unsettling. One particularly vivid figure in Tiamat's army was the viper, a serpent bristling with ferocity, its body gleaming like burnished bronze. The viper, much like the horned serpent, stood as a symbol of hidden danger and sudden death, its presence reminding the audience of how the natural world was filled with both beauty and lethal peril. The fishman, or Kalulu, was another striking creation, a hybrid with the torso of a man but the tail of a great fish. To Mesopotamian listeners, who lived beside rivers and were constantly aware of the dangers hidden in watery depths, such a figure would have embodied both the fear and mystery of aquatic realms. What is remarkable about Tiamat's creatures is their hybridity. Each one blurred the boundaries of categories, half animal, half human, half known, half unknown. This blending itself was terrifying, for in Mesopotamian thought, order depended on clear divisions, heaven separated from earth, the gods divided into roles, humans given their place in creation. Monsters represented a direct challenge to this order. By summoning such beings, Tiamat was not only preparing for war but unleashing the full chaos of the undifferentiated cosmos. The myth emphasizes that these were not independent beings acting on their own. They were animated by Tiamat's will, weapons in her cosmic rebellion. To lead them, she placed Kingu, her chosen consort, at the head of her army. To him, she gave the Tablet of Destinies, a divine object that conferred authority over fate itself. With this artifact, Kingu became the general of chaos, and the monstrous army gained legitimacy. Together, Tiamat, Kingu, and the creatures represented a unified front of rebellion against the divine order represented by Marduk and the younger gods. The Chaos Army is more than just a narrative obstacle for the gods to overcome. Symbolically, it represents the raw forces of creation in their untamed state. Before there was order, there was only the formless sea, populated by strange beings without boundaries. By shaping these monsters, Tiamat was drawing on that primordial essence, reminding the younger gods that their order was fragile, newly imposed upon an older and wilder cosmos. In this sense, the creatures are the ancestors of all monsters in myth, the prototypes of later dragons, chimeras, and hybrid beasts in cultures around the world. For the ancient Mesopotamians, the imagery of Tiamat's army would have been both frightening and awe-inspiring. They lived in a world where natural disasters, floods, storms, droughts, plagues, could suddenly overturn human life. The chaos monsters reflected these forces, unpredictable, overwhelming, beyond human control. In ritual and storytelling, recounting Marduk's eventual triumph over Tiamat and her creations was a way of affirming that order could prevail over chaos, that the universe was not doomed to dissolve into the unpredictable violence of nature. The battle that followed was epic in scale. Marduk, armed with a net to trap Tiamat and a bow to pierce her, faced the Queen of Chaos herself. When he defeated her, splitting her body to form the heavens and the earth, the monsters she had created were subdued. Some were slain outright, while others were bound and repurposed into the ordered world. In certain interpretations, their images were carved into protective amulets or set as guardians at temple gates, their once terrifying power transformed into symbols of divine protection. This reflects a fascinating duality. The very creatures of chaos could, when brought under control, become allies of order. In a bedtime retelling, the chaos creatures can be softened into strange but fascinating figures. Children might imagine the horned serpent winding across the sand like a jeweled ribbon, or the fishman peering curiously from beneath river waters. The lions and dogs could be seen as enormous guardians of Tiamat's realm, fierce but majestic. Framed this way, the story becomes less about horror and more about the wonder of creation, the idea that before the familiar world, there existed a host of strange, dreamlike beings, whose forms were both frightening and beautiful. The deeper message of Tiamat's army is one of transformation. Chaos is frightening, but it is also the source of creation. Without the raw, wild energy of the sea and its monsters, there could be no ordered universe. The struggle between Tiamat and Marduk is not simply destruction but the shaping of potential into form. The monsters, terrifying though they were, played a crucial role in that shaping. They remind us that even the darkest, most unsettling aspects of existence can give birth to order, meaning, and new beginnings. Thus, the chaos creatures of Tiamat's army stand as some of the earliest recorded monsters in human imagination. They are not villains in a simple sense, but embodiments of a greater truth, that chaos and order are forever locked in tension, and from their clash arises the world we know. Their legacy is found in every dragon, hydra, and hybrid beast of later myths, carrying forward the memory of a time when gods battled monsters to carve meaning from the void. In Mesopotamian mythology, the underworld was not merely a place of shadows or abstract darkness, it was imagined as a structured, fortified realm where the dead resided. Known as Irkalla or the Land of No Return, it was a vast, silent kingdom governed by Ereshkigal, the Queen of the Dead. Unlike the heavens of the gods or the fertile earth of the living, Irkalla was envisioned as a place where vitality drained away, where dust and clay served as food, and where song and laughter faded into muted echoes. Yet despite its bleakness, it was not unprotected or loosely governed. The gates of the underworld were watched by formidable guardians, beings of stone who stood as sentinels against intrusion. These guardians embodied both awe and dread, their very presence ensuring that no soul entered or escaped without permission. The ancient texts described the underworld as being secured by 7 gates. Each gate was sealed with a lock, and at each stood guardians of immense strength, often carved from stone or fashioned by the divine will of Ereshkigal herself. These guardians were not simply passive statues, they were animate, capable of enforcing their queen's laws. When Inanna, goddess of love and war, made her famous descent into the underworld, she encountered these gates one by one. At each, she was required to surrender a piece of her divine regalia, her crown, her breastplate, her rings, until she stood vulnerable and stripped of power before the throne of Ereshkigal. The stone guardians were the keepers of this ritual. Their purpose was to ensure that no power, no matter how radiant, could pass freely into the realm of the dead without paying its toll. Descriptions of these guardians are often vague in surviving myths, and this vagueness itself adds to their aura of menace. Were they towering humanoid figures, carved from basalt and brought to life by divine breath? Were they grotesque hybrids like the chaos monsters of Tiamat, their stone limbs blending features of lion, eagle, and scorpion? Or were they silent, expressionless statues, their strength not in physical weapons but in the inevitability of fate? The ambiguity of their forms is haunting, and it may have been deliberate. In a world where stone held permanence and divine significance, to imagine guardians of stone was to imagine protectors who could never decay, never tire, and never be overcome by mortal means. These stone guardians held symbolic meaning as well. They were not only sentinels at the threshold of death but also representations of the finality of mortality. To stand before them was to recognize that the realm beyond was inescapable. Just as stone endures long after human life passes, so too did the underworld endure, cold and unchanging. The Mesopotamians, who built temples and ziggurats of brick and stone, were intimately aware of the endurance of such materials. Their myths projected this endurance onto supernatural beings, making the guardians not only protectors of the dead but symbols of eternity itself. Yet, despite their severity, these beings could also be seen as stabilizing forces. The underworld, grim though it was, represented order. It was not a chaotic realm where souls wandered endlessly. Instead, it had rules, rulers, and boundaries, and the stone guardians were essential to maintaining this structure. Without them, the dead might spill back into the land of the living, bringing disorder and terror. With them, the boundary between worlds remained sealed. In this sense, the guardians are paradoxical figures, terrifying to behold, yet comforting in their duty, ensuring that life and death remained distinct. One tale that illustrates their function comes from Inanna's descent. As she passed through each gate, she faced the guardians' silent demand for surrender. Their presence made it clear that even the brightest goddess could not bypass the laws of death. For listeners and worshippers, this story carried a sobering lesson. No crown, no jewel, no divine weapon could override the inevitability of mortality. The stone guardians, in their unyielding silence, taught that lesson more powerfully than words ever could. Their strength lay not in cruelty but in their embodiment of inevitability. We might also imagine these beings in a softer light, especially when retold in the quiet of a bedtime story. Instead of monstrous wardens, they can be pictured as solemn statues, watching with calm patience over the gates. Their expressions might be unreadable but not hostile, their duty one of order rather than malice. Like ancient trees that watch silently over a forest, the stone guardians could be seen as timeless observers, standing watch at the edge of life's final threshold. In this gentler framing, they are not figures of fear but of solemn reassurance, that the passage into death is guided and protected, not abandoned to chaos. In a symbolic sense, the guardians also remind us of the monuments humans leave behind. Just as Mesopotamian kings and rulers built statues of themselves to endure through time, so too did myth imagine stone beings who lasted beyond any single lifetime. These figures suggest a deep human desire to connect permanence with protection. If human lives fade like clay washed away by rain, then perhaps stone, unyielding and eternal, might preserve the memory of boundaries, laws, and order. The guardians thus link mythology with architecture, showing how human imagination transforms physical material into spiritual significance. Ultimately, the stone guardians of the underworld are not as well known as Tiamat's chaos creatures or Anzu's storm-filled thefts, but they hold a crucial role in the mythological landscape. They stand at the edges, silent but unshakable, reminding us that life's journey has a boundary and that beyond it lies another realm, structured and sealed. In Mesopotamian thought, these guardians were not villains but essential enforcers of cosmic balance. They ensured that the realms of gods, humans, and the dead remained distinct, preserving the order on which the universe depended. Their legacy, though faint in written texts, endures in the archetypal image of gatekeepers across cultures. From the sphinxes guarding Egyptian temples to the stone lions of Chinese palaces, from medieval gargoyles to the imagined wardens of heaven's gates, the idea of statues that come alive to protect sacred thresholds may trace its ancestry back to these Mesopotamian beings. In the quiet of night, when one hears stories of these silent stone watchers, there is both unease and comfort. For even in the darkest realms, even in the land of no return, there are guardians who stand watch, ensuring that every passage follows its destined path. Among the most recognizable and enduring images of Mesopotamian mythology is the lamassu, the great winged bull with a human face, carved in stone and set at the entrances of palaces and temples. Unlike the monstrous chaos beings of Tiamat's army or the silent stone guardians of the underworld, the lamassu were not figures of dread but of protection. They embodied the fusion of strength, intelligence, and divinity, their very presence meant to shield sacred and royal spaces from harm. Standing at thresholds, they were neither wholly of the world of gods nor entirely of the human realm, but intermediaries who bridged those planes. To the people of Mesopotamia, they were guardians of order, reminders that divine power could be protective rather than destructive. The lamassu combined the body of a bull or lion, the wings of an eagle, and the face of a human. Each element carried symbolic weight. The bull represented physical strength and fertility, tied to the power of the earth and agriculture. The eagle's wings symbolized the heavens, granting the lamassu speed, majesty, and the ability to watch from above. The human face conveyed wisdom and consciousness, suggesting that this guardian was not a mindless beast but a deliberate protector with insight and awareness. Together, these features created a composite being whose form expressed harmony among the forces of earth, sky, and intellect. Where chaos monsters blurred categories to threaten order, the lamassu combined categories to affirm and safeguard it. These statues were massive, sometimes weighing over 10 tons, and positioned at gateways to palaces such as those in Nineveh and Nimrud. Carved with 5 legs, they presented 2 perspectives. When viewed from the front, they stood still and firm, exuding stability. When viewed from the side, they appeared in motion, striding forward with purpose. This artistic choice reflected the duality of their role. The lamassu were both stationary guardians, rooted at the threshold, and living spirits, actively protecting those within. Their placement made clear to all who entered that the building was under divine watch, shielded by powers greater than any human authority. The protective nature of the lamassu extended beyond physical defense. They were believed to ward off evil spirits and malevolent forces, the unseen dangers that lurked beyond human perception. In this sense, they were not only military sentinels but also spiritual ones. Their role was to filter what passed into sacred space, allowing prosperity, loyalty, and peace to enter while repelling curses, treachery, and chaos. In ritual contexts, prayers and incantations sometimes invoked protective spirits like the lamassu, drawing upon their imagined strength to safeguard households, kings, and cities. For the Mesopotamians, whose world was precarious and filled with uncertainty, these guardians were a source of reassurance. Floods could erase farmlands, invasions could topple cities, and disease could spread without warning. In such a world, to place a lamassu at the gate was to symbolically enlist the help of divine order against the unpredictability of existence. The very image of these beings, carved in enduring stone, carried psychological weight. Their sheer size and solemn presence inspired awe, reminding both citizens and enemies that the king was not unprotected, that unseen powers watched over the heart of the empire. Interestingly, lamassu were not only placed in royal contexts. Small protective figures echoing their design were sometimes buried beneath doorways or foundations, ensuring that ordinary households could benefit from their safeguarding presence. These miniature versions show how the mythology of protective spirits permeated all levels of society. From grand palaces to modest homes, people looked to hybrid guardians to maintain the fragile boundary between safety and danger. The lamassu thus became part of daily life, not just distant symbols of royal authority. In a broader mythological sense, the lamassu illustrate how Mesopotamian imagination reworked the idea of hybrids. Where Tiamat's army created hybrids to destabilize order, the lamassu represented the positive potential of blending traits. Strength, swiftness, and wisdom were brought together not to sow fear but to ensure peace. In this way, they reveal how ancient societies saw guardianship not merely as brute force but as a balance of qualities. Protection required not only power but also intelligence and divine awareness. This holistic vision of guardianship gave the lamassu a timeless appeal, making them far more than decorative statues. When retold in a bedtime setting, the lamassu become almost comforting figures. Instead of terrifying monsters, they can be seen as noble companions, patient and vigilant, keeping quiet watch at the edges of dreams. Their wings might be imagined as unfolding like soft blankets of cloud, their faces calm and wise, their eyes gentle but watchful. In the stillness of night, one can picture them guarding doorways, ensuring that the slumbering soul remains safe from wandering shadows. For listeners drifting to sleep, the lamassu's presence transforms into an image of peace, reminding them that, even in darkness, there are protectors who never rest. The enduring legacy of the lamassu is visible even today. Museums across the world house these statues, their immense forms still radiating strength millennia after their creation. Though they are now removed from the palaces they once guarded, their aura remains unmistakable. They are a reminder of how humans across time have sought reassurance in the face of vulnerability. Just as ancient Mesopotamians placed them at gates to guard against evil, so too do we continue to create symbols of guardianship, locks, charms, rituals, seeking the same sense of security that the lamassu embodied so long ago. In the larger narrative of Mesopotamian myth, the Lamassu stand out not as creatures of fear but as beings of balance. They are proof that mythology was not only about chaos and destruction but also about protection and care. Their carved wings still seem to hover at the edges of memory, whispering reassurance across centuries. As one imagines lying down to rest, it is easy to picture them standing silent at the doorway, vast and unshakable, keeping vigil until morning light. Among the labyrinth of Mesopotamian myths, some stories loom large in written tradition, while others linger only as fragments, whispers of once powerful legends. One such tale is that of the seven-headed serpent, a fearsome creature whose defeat by the storm god Ninurta symbolized the eternal struggle between divine order and monstrous chaos. Though fewer records survive of this serpent than of Tiamat's epic battle or Gilgamesh's quest, the fragments we have allow us to glimpse a mythic beast both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a serpent whose multiple heads made it a formidable foe, and whose story reflects a recurring theme in ancient mythology, the triumph of light and law over darkness and disorder. The serpent was said to dwell in wild, untamed places, perhaps the mountains or deep marshes where ordinary humans dared not venture. Each of its 7 heads may have represented different threats, themes that Mesopotamians recognized in the natural world. One head might breathe fire, another venom, one might crush with its bite, another constrict like a python. The number 7 itself carried sacred weight in Mesopotamian thought, representing completeness and cosmic cycles. Thus, a serpent with 7 heads was not just an oversized reptile but a creature embodying totality of danger, the fullness of chaos concentrated into a single monstrous form. To conquer it was to conquer disorder in all its aspects. Ninurta, the hero who rose against the serpent, was himself a god of war, hunting, and agriculture, a deity who bridged destruction and fertility. His role as the slayer of monstrous beings aligned him with the preservation of cosmic order. In the surviving myths, Ninurta defeats the 7-headed serpent and displays its corpse as a trophy in his temple. This act was not simply a boast of power but a symbolic reminder to worshippers that chaos had been subdued and that divine protection was secure. For a people whose lives depended on the rhythms of rivers and crops, such stories reaffirmed their faith that the violent unpredictability of nature could be restrained by divine might. When we imagine this serpent in the calm of bedtime storytelling, it transforms from a horrifying monster into a more dreamlike figure. We can picture its 7 heads rising like towers above the marshes, their scales glittering like jewels in moonlight. Each head might have its own personality, one hissing with anger, another sighing like the wind, another gazing silently at the stars. Instead of a nightmare, the serpent becomes a symbol of vastness, a reminder of the mysteries that dwell in hidden places. The idea of a storm god taming such a beast then shifts into a tale of balance, a reassurance that no matter how overwhelming the forces of the world may seem, order and safety can always emerge. The story of the serpent also links Mesopotamia with other mythological traditions. Across the ancient world, multi-headed serpents appear as archetypal foes. In Greek myth, Heracles battled the Hydra. In Indian tradition, the Naga Vasuki coils beneath cosmic scenes. In later Judeo-Christian imagery, the dragon or Leviathan bears similar traits. These parallels suggest that the Mesopotamian 7-headed serpent is one of the earliest examples of a shared mythological motif, the many-headed dragon or snake as the embodiment of chaos itself. The recurrence of this image points to a universal human instinct, to imagine chaos as a writhing, many-faced creature, overwhelming in form, yet always destined to be conquered by a hero. Other forgotten Mesopotamian myths also hint at strange beings and obscure battles. Texts mention a lion-headed eagle, half-bird and half-predator, soaring as a creature of both sky and savagery. There are scattered references to sea beasts and shadowy figures who lurked at the edges of creation, their names lost to time but their existence suggested in broken lines of clay tablets. These fragments remind us that Mesopotamian mythology was not a closed canon but a living tradition, constantly told, retold, and reshaped, with countless stories fading before they could be written down. Each fragment is like a shard of pottery, hinting at the grandeur of a whole vessel we can no longer see. The 7-headed serpent, however, has endured in memory because it embodies a core truth of Mesopotamian belief, that chaos could never be eliminated entirely, only fought and subdued again and again. Ninurta's triumph was not the final word, but a reassurance repeated in ritual and story. Listeners may have known that storms would still rage, floods would still come, and serpents would still lurk in rivers, but the story told them that divine order would rise each time, that the gods stood ready to protect creation. For a modern audience drifting to sleep, these forgotten myths invite us into a dreamlike landscape. We might imagine walking along ancient riverbanks, hearing distant hisses from marsh reeds, glimpsing a scale glimmering in torchlight. We might picture Ninurta striding through storm clouds, his bow shining like lightning, his voice carrying across valleys as he faces the serpent. Yet, instead of fear, we can allow ourselves to feel the reassurance these stories once carried, that chaos, no matter how vast or multi-headed, can be met with courage, and that in the end, balance will always return. In this way, the seven-headed serpent is more than just a forgotten beast. It is a reminder of the human need to tell stories that confront fear, give shape to danger, and ultimately promise safety. By giving chaos a form, the Mesopotamians also gave themselves a sense of control. And by remembering even the fragments of such myths today, we continue that ancient practice, soothing our anxieties through tales where monsters rise but are always overcome. The serpent rests now in broken lines of clay tablets, but in imagination it still coils and uncoils, its seven heads watching as we drift into dreams, carrying us to a place where myth and comfort intertwine. While some creatures of Mesopotamian mythology were guardians, protectors, or symbols of cosmic balance, others embodied the fears that plagued daily life. Among these, none were as dreaded as the demons of sickness, nightmares, and child mortality. For a society where disease could sweep through households without warning and where infant survival was never guaranteed, such beings were not abstract terrors, they were explanations for real suffering. Chief among them were Lamashtu, the demoness of fever, sickness, and infant death, and Pazuzu, a grotesque yet paradoxically protective spirit often invoked to ward off her malevolence. Lamashtu was feared above all. She was imagined as a terrifying hybrid figure, often described with a lioness's head, a donkey's teeth, a hairy body, clawed feet, and the wings of a bird. In some depictions, she carried serpents in her hands or suckled animals at her breasts, images that suggested her perverse, inverted role as a nurturer-turned-destroyer. She was not a minor demon serving under the gods but an independent force, capable of terrorizing humans without divine command. Her domain was illness and the vulnerability of infants, striking where families were weakest. For expectant mothers and newborns, her presence was a constant dread. Stories and rituals describe her as creeping into homes under the cover of night, bringing fever to babies, stealing nourishment from mothers, and disturbing the sleep of entire households. Dreams, too, were her territory. Frightening visions and restless nights were often attributed to her malign influence. In this way, Lamashtu became the personification of everything that was unpredictable and cruel in life, a reminder that even in a world of protective spirits and mighty gods, danger was never far away. Yet within Mesopotamian belief there existed a strange paradox. The demon Pazuzu, equally grotesque in appearance, was often invoked to protect against Lamashtu. Pazuzu himself was imagined with the face of a snarling lion dog, bulging eyes, a scaly body, taloned hands and feet, wings of a bird, and the tail of a scorpion. He embodied the harsh desert wind that could bring famine and plague. On his own, he was a terrifying figure, a spirit of misfortune and disease. But because he was stronger than Lamashtu, his image was employed to repel her attacks. Amulets depicting Pazuzu were hung in homes or around the necks of mothers and children, his frightful visage serving as a shield against the demoness. This duality, where one demon was used to protect against another, reveals the complexity of Mesopotamian spirituality. Good and evil were not always neatly divided. Beings like Pazuzu could embody destructive forces while simultaneously being harnessed as guardians. It was a recognition that sometimes the best defense against chaos was not pure goodness, but a more powerful embodiment of the same wild forces redirected toward protection. The terrifying could also be protective, depending on how it was invoked. Archaeological finds reinforce this. Countless amulets and small statues of Pazuzu have been discovered, often inscribed with protective prayers. Many show him with his hands raised, as though warding off evil. Some were placed under pillows or near cradles, literal safeguards against night terrors and disease. These objects were not only religious artifacts but deeply personal possessions, carried in hope by families who had little control over sickness and mortality. The act of placing a Pazuzu amulet was an act of reassurance, a way to feel some agency in a world where death could arrive silently. Meanwhile, Lamashtu was warded against with specific rituals. Priests and healers conducted incantations to banish her, often reciting her many names to weaken her power. Clay plaques depicted her being forced away, bound, or driven back into wilderness. These rituals were part of a larger Mesopotamian system where words, images, and objects all carried protective weight. To speak the right incantation, to place the right figure in the right place, was to restore balance and push chaos back into the shadows. For a bedtime retelling, the figures of Lamashtu and Pazuzu shift into the realm of dreamlike archetypes. Lamashtu becomes the embodiment of nightmares, strange shadows that drift through windows and whisper fever into sleep. Pazuzu, though frightening in form, becomes a strange guardian, standing at the door with his wings spread wide, snarling not at the sleeper but at the dangers outside. In this softened telling, the story is not one of unending fear, but one of reassurance, that even in the darkest hours, there are forces, however unusual, watching to keep harm away. Symbolically, these demons also reveal the Mesopotamian understanding of balance. Every force had a counterforce. If there was a demoness of illness, there would also be a power that could stand against her. Life was precarious, but it was never entirely without defense. In imagining beings like Pazuzu, the Mesopotamians gave themselves hope that even the most terrifying adversary could be confronted. And in telling stories of Lamashtu, they made sense of suffering by giving it a face and a name. To name a fear was to reduce its power, to transform it from a nameless threat into something that could be resisted. The enduring fascination with these figures lies in their ambiguity. Lamashtu was not simply evil but also strangely maternal in her twisted way, a parody of motherhood that reflected the fragility of human beginnings. Pazuzu was not simply protective but also a reminder of the dangers of winds, droughts, and plagues. Together, they expressed the tension of a world where protection and danger were never far apart, and where even demons could sometimes be allies. This complexity is what makes them feel so alive even now, thousands of years later. In the stillness of night, as one reflects on these myths, there is a peculiar comfort in realizing that ancient people too wrestled with fears of illness, sleeplessness, and loss. Their demons were frightening, but their stories also offered tools for coping. They imagined guardians, charms, and incantations to push back the darkness. In retelling these myths, we connect with that same impulse, finding reassurance in the idea that fears can be given form, named, and counted. The tale of Lamashtu and Pazuzu is not merely one of terror but of resilience, the reminder that even nightmares can be faced, and that in the darkest hours, protectors, however unusual, will always stand watch. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's earliest surviving works of literature, is not only the story of a king searching for immortality but also a tapestry of myth in which terrifying beings symbolize the trials of existence. Among the most striking episodes is Gilgamesh's encounter with Humbaba, the monstrous guardian of the cedar forest. This tale is more than a heroic adventure, it is a reflection of how Mesopotamians understood power, fear, and the wild forces of nature. Humbaba was no ordinary adversary, he embodied the untamed and sacred wilderness, a domain both feared and revered. Humbaba was described as a terrifying creature with a face meant to inspire dread. His countenance was said to resemble a roaring lion or a distorted mask, sometimes imagined as a swirling tangle of intestines. He was cloaked in an aura of radiance, called his terrifying glory, which struck fear into any who gazed upon him. Unlike other demons or monsters who were independent agents of chaos, Humbaba served a purpose. He was appointed by the god Enlil to guard the cedar forest, one of the most sacred and majestic places in the mythological world. The forest itself was the source of divine wood, used for building temples and palaces, and thus it was both coveted and forbidden. Gilgamesh, driven by his restless spirit and thirst for glory, saw in Humbaba both a challenge and an opportunity. Alongside his companion Enkidu, he declared his intent to slay the guardian and claim the forest's treasures. Yet the journey was not simply about wood or conquest, It was about proving his strength, asserting his legacy, and defying the limits set by the gods. In this way, Humbaba became a test of courage and a symbol of the struggle between human ambition and divine order. The confrontation between Gilgamesh and Humbaba unfolds like a dream drenched in dread. Before reaching the forest, Gilgamesh is plagued by ominous visions. His dreams reveal shadows of death, serpents, and storms, as if the universe itself resists his encroachment. Enkidu, once a child of the wild, serves as both guide and conscience, reminding Gilgamesh of the dangers and the sacredness of the cedar forest. Yet even he is swept up in the thrill of the quest, torn between his reverence for nature and loyalty to his friend. When the two heroes finally face Humbaba, the encounter is not just a battle of strength but of wills. Humbaba's voice is said to echo like thunder, his breath a storm, his very presence a crushing weight. He pleads for his life, offering to serve Gilgamesh if spared, but the hero and his companion are driven by ambition. With the blessing of the sun god Shamash, who sends divine winds to bind and weaken the monster, Gilgamesh and Enkidu strike him down. The cedar forest trembles as Humbaba falls, and with his death comes a profound unease, a sense that something sacred has been violated. The killing of Humbaba is not portrayed as a simple triumph. Instead, it is laced with foreboding. By destroying the guardian, Gilgamesh asserts human dominance over nature, but he also unleashes consequences that ripple through the rest of his story. Some versions suggest that Enlil, enraged at the slaying of his appointed servant, curses Gilgamesh and Enkidu. This curse foreshadows Enkidu's eventual death, which becomes the catalyst for Gilgamesh's long and sorrowful search for immortality. Thus, the slaying of Humbaba becomes both a victory and a curse, a reminder that no conquest comes without cost. The myth carries layers of meaning beyond its narrative. Humbaba represents the wild and untamed forces of the world, forces that both sustain and threaten human life. The cedar forest, lush and sacred, was a symbol of abundance but also of limits set by the divine. In killing Humbaba and cutting down the sacred trees, Gilgamesh is not merely taking resources, he is defying the gods and upsetting the balance between humanity and nature. The story warns of hubris, of overstepping boundaries set by higher powers. At the same time, it reflects the human drive to conquer, to create, and to push against the constraints of existence. For Mesopotamian listeners, this tale would have carried deep resonance. They lived in a world where survival depended on balancing respect for the forces of nature with the need to use its resources. Forests, rivers, and storms could provide life but also destruction. Humbaba's terrifying glory was a mythic expression of that reality. By defeating him, Gilgamesh embodies humanity's ambition to tame the wild. Yet the unease that follows suggests an acknowledgement that nature, once violated, carries consequences. In this way, the myth is strikingly modern in its themes, foreshadowing the timeless tension between human progress and environmental reverence. When retold as a story for reflection or even as a bedtime tale, Humbaba takes on a dreamlike presence. He becomes less a monster and more an archetype of fear itself, the giant who guards the threshold, the shadow that tests courage, the voice that asks whether we are ready to face the unknown. His fall is not simply the defeat of evil but the cost of ambition. In the quiet of night, this story whispers that bravery brings glory but also responsibility, and that the choices we make echo far beyond the moment of triumph. Symbolically, Gilgamesh's slaying of Humbaba also sets the stage for his larger journey. In defeating the guardian, he confronts mortality, destiny, and the weight of divine judgment. Humbaba's death becomes the first crack in the armor of Gilgamesh's pride, leading him down the path toward grief, humility, and the search for eternal life. It is a reminder that heroes are not only measured by victories but by how they carry the consequences of their actions. The story of Gilgamesh and Humbaba endures because it speaks to universal human struggles, the urge to achieve greatness, the temptation to overreach, the conflict between nature and civilization, and the haunting awareness that all victories are temporary. Humbaba, though monstrous, is not forgotten as a villain but remembered as a necessary force, a boundary keeper whose death still echoes with questions. Was his slaying a triumph of humanity or the beginning of a tragic fall? That ambiguity is what gives the story its power, allowing it to live on not just as an ancient myth but as a timeless meditation on ambition, fear, and the fragile balance of life. The Epic of Gilgamesh unfolds like a dreamscape where human ambition collides with divine power, and among its most dramatic and terrifying episodes is the summoning of the Bull of Heaven. Unlike Humbaba, who guarded the cedar forest in service to the gods, the Bull of Heaven was unleashed as a weapon of divine wrath, a force of destruction sent directly from the heavens themselves. Its appearance in the story marks a turning point, not just for Gilgamesh and Enkidu, but for the balance between humans and gods. The bull is not simply an animal, it is a cosmic entity, embodying famine, drought, and the crushing power of divine punishment. The story begins after Gilgamesh and Enkidu's triumph over Humbaba, when Gilgamesh's fame spreads far and wide. His strength and beauty catch the attention of Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, who offers him her hand in marriage. But Gilgamesh rejects her in a speech that is both insulting and reckless, listing the misfortunes of her past lovers. Enraged by this humiliation, Ishtar ascends to the heavens and pleads with her father, Anu, to release the Bull of Heaven to punish Gilgamesh and his city, Uruk. Anu hesitates, warning that unleashing such a beast would bring famine and devastation across the land. Yet Ishtar persists, and finally the bull is set loose. The arrival of the bull is described with imagery both terrifying and awe-inspiring. It descends from the sky like a storm, its hooves shaking the earth, its breath scorching fields, its presence causing rivers to dry and crops to wither. Wherever it treads, famine follows, leaving people weak and desperate. The Bull of Heaven is not a natural creature but a divine catastrophe given form. Its descent is a reminder that the gods could devastate human lives in an instant, a truth that Mesopotamian society knew well from floods, droughts, and other unpredictable disasters. To the people of Uruk, this was no mere punishment for Gilgamesh's arrogance but a catastrophe that endangered them all. Gilgamesh and Enkidu rise to face the bull, though the task is monumental. The beast's sheer size and divine strength make it seem unstoppable, but together the heroes confront it with courage. Enkidu seizes the bull by its massive horns, holding it steady, while Gilgamesh delivers the fatal blow. Their combined strength triumphs once more, and the Bull of Heaven collapses upon the earth, shaking the ground with its fall. The people of Uruk rejoice at their victory, but the scene is laced with tension, for in slaying a divine beast, Gilgamesh and Enkidu cross another sacred boundary. The aftermath of this battle reveals the deeper consequences of defying the gods. Ishtar, outraged by the death of her divine champion, curses the heroes from the walls of Uruk. Enkidu, in an act of defiance, tears off the bull's haunch and hurls it toward her, a gesture of contempt that further angers the goddess. It is in this moment that the gods convene and decree that one of the heroes must pay with his life. Though both fought the bull, it is Enkidu who is chosen to die, setting the stage for the central tragedy of the epic. Thus, the victory over the Bull of Heaven becomes the direct cause of Enkidu's death, and with it, Gilgamesh's profound grief and transformation. Symbolically, the Bull of Heaven represents more than divine punishment. Its presence embodies the destructive forces that follow when pride and desire collide. Ishtar's wrath, Gilgamesh's arrogance, and the gods' retribution intertwine in a story that reflects the fragility of human life under divine authority. To a Mesopotamian audience, the bull was a personification of famine and drought, forces that could decimate entire cities regardless of human effort. By defeating it, Gilgamesh and Enkidu showed human courage, but by doing so, they also reminded listeners of the consequences of hubris, for no mortal could truly overcome the gods without cost. The tale carries emotional weight when retold in a softer, reflective manner. One can imagine the bull shimmering as it descends from the heavens, its great body glowing with celestial light, its eyes burning like twin suns. The sound of its hooves could be like thunder rolling endlessly across the plains, while its breath dries the rivers, leaving cracked earth in its wake. In the stillness of night, we can imagine the people of Uruk huddling together, their fields ruined, their hearts trembling, as their king stands against this otherworldly terror. Yet instead of despair, the story reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming power, courage and loyalty can prevail. But the cost of this battle lingers like a shadow. For Enkidu, the bull marks the beginning of his decline, the moment when the gods decide his fate. His defiance of Ishtar and his role in killing the divine beast seal his doom. For Gilgamesh, the bull becomes a symbol of the price of ambition. He gains victory but loses his closest companion. The story thus moves from triumph to tragedy, guiding the listener gently from the height of glory into the depths of sorrow, much like the rhythms of life itself. As a bedtime story, the Bull of Heaven teaches us to see in our dreams both the grandeur and fragility of existence. It speaks of battles that shake the earth, of gods who watch and judge, and of friendships tested by fate. Yet, in the calmness of reflection, it also reassures us that every struggle, even against overwhelming odds, carries meaning. The bull, though terrifying, becomes part of a greater tapestry, reminding us that courage, even when costly, shapes the stories that endure. And as we drift into sleep, the sound of its hooves fades into the distance, a memory of divine storms conquered, and of the eternal bond between friends who dared to stand against the heavens themselves. Among the most haunting and profound stories in Sumerian mythology is the descent of Inanna, goddess of love, fertility, and war, into the underworld. Unlike the heroic exploits of Gilgamesh or battles against monstrous beings, Inanna's journey is an intimate exploration of vulnerability, power, and transformation. She ventures into Irkalla, the land of the dead, seeking to extend her dominion and gain wisdom, yet the story quickly becomes a meditation on mortality, the fragility of status, and the inevitability of cosmic rules. The narrative begins with Inanna adorning herself in her divine regalia, crown, necklace, rings, and ceremonial garments, symbols of her power, authority, and identity. Her descent is purposeful. She wishes to confront her sister Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, perhaps to claim the secrets of death or to expand her influence. Yet the underworld is a place of strict rules and finality, and her preparation, lavish as it is, cannot fully shield her from the domain she seeks to enter. The journey itself is a passage into vulnerability, a stripping away of worldly power as she approaches gates that guard thresholds beyond life. As Inanna approaches the 7 gates of the underworld, each is guarded by a sentient being or stone sentinel. At every gate, she is forced to relinquish a piece of her regalia, symbolically surrendering power and status, until she stands completely exposed before Ereshkigal. The act of stripping, performed gate by gate, is not merely physical but deeply symbolic. It represents humility, recognition of limits, and the necessity of vulnerability when facing death or the unknown. For a listener, these stages unfold like a quiet meditation, a journey that mirrors the process of self-reflection, transformation, and surrender that comes with confronting one's deepest fears. At the heart of Irkalla, Inanna encounters her sister, Ereshkigal, whose domain is silent and immutable. The queen of the underworld is formidable, both commanding and detached. When Inanna stands before her, powerless and stripped of all worldly adornment, she becomes subject to the laws of the dead. Inanna's capture and death are swift and merciless, underscoring the inevitability of mortality even for a goddess. She is transformed into a lifeless figure, hung on a hook, a vivid image of suspension between worlds. The scene, while grim, is imbued with a strange, dreamlike quality, a quiet stillness that evokes contemplation rather than horror. The myth emphasizes balance and reciprocity in the cosmos. Inanna's absence leaves the world of the living bereft, crops fail, rivers run low, and the natural order falters. Her descent is thus not only a personal trial but a disruption of life itself, illustrating the interconnectedness of divine action and earthly consequence. This reinforces a recurring theme in Sumerian thought, that life, death, and divine authority are intertwined, and that no action occurs in isolation. Every choice, every journey, even that of a goddess, carries reverberations across the cosmos. Rescue and restoration come through clever negotiation and divine intercession. Enki, god of wisdom and water, creates 2 beings who infiltrate the underworld, revive Inanna, and help her return to life. This act illustrates a central lesson. While death is inevitable, knowledge, cunning, and mediation can restore balance, allowing the cycle of life to continue. The narrative thus frames death and return not as mere punishment or fate but as stages in an ongoing cosmic rhythm. Inanna's re-emergence from the underworld is a rebirth, symbolic of resilience, renewal, and the eternal cycles of life, death, and transformation. For listeners, especially in a bedtime storytelling context, Inanna's descent becomes a metaphorical journey. The relinquishing of her regalia can be envisioned as shedding layers of worry, pride, and fear. Her encounter with Ereshkigal embodies facing one's deepest anxieties or confronting the inevitability of change. The silent, still underworld becomes a place not of terror but of reflection, a dreamlike space where one considers mortality, loss, and growth in a calm, meditative rhythm. The story reassures that even in surrender and vulnerability, there is a path to renewal and empowerment. Moreover, the tale highlights the interplay between light and shadow, activity and stillness, life and death. Inanna's bright, radiant identity contrasts with the muted, enduring realm of Irkalla. Each step she takes deeper into the underworld emphasizes contrast, color against darkness, motion against stillness, desire against inevitability. This narrative tension keeps the listener engaged while maintaining a gentle, contemplative tone suitable for immersive, relaxing storytelling. Symbolically, Inanna's journey reflects the human experience. Every individual encounters metaphorical gates of surrender, challenges, losses, and transitions that strip away external markers of identity. Like Inanna, humans may emerge transformed, carrying wisdom, resilience, and a deeper appreciation for the balance of life and death. The myth encourages reflection on vulnerability, courage, and the cycles of change, creating a narrative that is both emotionally rich and soothing in cadence, ideal for contemplation before sleep. Inanna's descent also serves as a counterpoint to the monstrous confrontations of other myths. Whereas Humbaba or the Bull of Heaven are externalized threats, monsters to fight, disasters to endure, Inanna's challenge is internal, spiritual, and relational. Her underworld journey emphasizes psychological and moral complexity rather than physical combat, offering a different kind of suspense and emotional resonance. The story gently guides the listener through tension and release, fear and calm, ultimately arriving at restoration and continuity. In essence, the underworld journey of Inanna is a meditation on mortality, power, and renewal. Her passage through gates, her encounter with Ereshkigal, and her eventual resurrection provide a mythic map for understanding life's rhythms. In a storytelling context, it evokes both awe and serenity, blending vivid imagery with reflective depth. As one imagines the quiet halls of Irkalla, the stripped goddess, and the patient guardians of the gates, the tale becomes a pathway to gentle introspection, a reminder that even in darkness, there is a rhythm, a balance, and a return to light. Mesopotamian mythology is rich with creatures born of both land and water, and among the most awe-inspiring are the serpentine and draconic beasts that inhabit rivers, marshes, and oceans. Chief among these is the Ungulu, often depicted as a mighty horned serpent or dragon, whose presence is felt in the twisting waters of the Tigris and Euphrates. Unlike guardians such as the Lamassu or heroic adversaries like Humbaba, these water creatures evoke both fascination and dread. They are liminal beings, existing between land and liquid, life and death, chaos and order. The Ungulu, whose name translates roughly to Great Serpent, was feared for its immense power and unpredictable nature. It embodies the forces of water that could bring life, sustenance, and fertility to the Fertile Crescent, yet also bring devastating floods and destruction when unchecked. Ancient texts describe it as possessing a massive, coiled body, clawed limbs, and a gaping maw capable of swallowing boats or men whole. In some depictions, it bears horns and spines, adding a regal and terrifying majesty to its form. This duality, both terrifying and awe-inspiring, is central to Mesopotamian conceptualizations of water, nourishing and dangerous, life-giving and destructive. The myths surrounding Ungulu often place it in opposition to deities or heroes who seek to maintain order. Some stories suggest it was vanquished or subdued by storm gods or heroic figures, representing the triumph of civilization and divine will over natural chaos. Yet other texts imply that it is not entirely defeated but remains a lurking presence, a reminder that water and its forces can never be fully tamed. Floods, storms, and shifting river channels were daily realities for Mesopotamians, and these myths served as a symbolic lens through which to interpret these natural phenomena. Water beasts in Mesopotamian thought were not only destructive but also deeply symbolic. Rivers were life-sustaining arteries, crucial for agriculture and survival, yet their waters were unpredictable. To personify the rivers as monstrous or semi-divine serpents like Umgalu allowed the Mesopotamians to narratively contain their fears and exert a sense of understanding and control. By envisioning these creatures, they could enact rituals, offer prayers, and seek the favor of gods to avert calamity. The sea monsters were thus simultaneously enemies, teachers, and mirrors of the natural world. Other water-dwelling beasts appear in myths alongside Umgalu. Some were hybrid creatures, combining features of lions, birds, and fish, and sometimes even human elements, representing the liminality of riverine and marsh environments. One such figure is the Mu, a dragon-like creature whose sinuous body and long tongue evoke both elegance and menace. These creatures were often connected with deities of water, fertility, and chaos, reinforcing the idea that rivers and marshes were domains of unpredictable divine influence. The creatures' forms, though monstrous, were artistic expressions of the Mesopotamians' attempt to reconcile or with survival. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, lifelines of Sumerian and Akkadian civilization, were central to these stories. Seasonal flooding could enrich the land, but sudden surges could devastate crops, villages, and trade routes. By envisioning these waters as home to Umgalu and other water beasts, myths rendered natural phenomena into entities that could be confronted through ritual, offering, or heroism. Heroes like Ninurta or Gilgamesh, in some traditions, symbolically navigated these watery threats, showing that courage, wisdom, and divine favor were required to thrive in such a precarious environment. Imagining these myths as a bedtime story transforms their tone while preserving their grandeur. Umgalu coils beneath moonlit waters, its scales glimmering like stars reflected in the Tigris. It moves silently, yet its presence is undeniable, a reminder of the living river beneath calm surfaces. Smaller water beasts dart among reeds, their glimmering eyes peeking out, and the marsh itself seems to breathe with hidden life. In this calm retelling, the monster's menace softens into wonder, emphasizing the beauty and mystery of the natural world even as its dangers remain acknowledged. These stories also contain lessons in balance and respect. Umgalu and other water beasts are not mindless threats. They are forces of nature personified, demanding care, reverence, and understanding. Mesopotamian farmers, fishermen, and city dwellers alike would have recognized the importance of harmony with the waters. Overfishing, reckless irrigation, or hubris could invite disaster. In myth, this harmony is dramatized through confrontation, negotiation, and the periodic triumphs of gods and heroes, creating narratives that both thrill and instruct, combining cautionary wisdom with the awe of imagination. Water monsters also function as metaphors for emotional and psychological states. Just as rivers can surge unexpectedly, so too can fear, anger, or grief overwhelm the human spirit. Umgalu's serpentine coils and unpredictable strength can be seen as reflections of internal turbulence, while the hero's navigation and confrontation of these creatures represent the disciplined mind seeking mastery over chaos. In bedtime storytelling, this dual interpretation invites listeners to see not only the literal dangers of nature but also the metaphorical journey of the mind through turbulence toward calm and understanding. Finally, the legacy of these water beasts endures in art, literature, and imagination. Cylinder seals, reliefs, and tablets depict serpentine bodies winding across landscapes, reminding us that the Mesopotamians were not only fearful of these creatures but also fascinated by their forms. Even today, imagining Umgalu slithering beneath the Tigris evokes a sense of continuity with ancient thought, a bridge between awe, fear, and reverence. The stories serve as meditative tales, a way to respect nature's power while marveling at its beauty, ideal for quiet contemplation or the slow descent into sleep. In essence, Umgalu and its kin are emblematic of Mesopotamian mythic imagination, creatures that blend terror and wonder, chaos and order, danger and instruction. They remind listeners that the forces shaping life are not always visible, that the rivers that sustain us also challenge us, and that courage, reverence, and understanding are needed to navigate the unknown. In the stillness of night, the serpents of the Tigris glide silently through imagination, their coils teaching both vigilance and calm, their glimmering eyes a gentle reminder of the mysteries that surround and sustain all life. Mesopotamian myths frequently depict a world where humans and gods coexist with forces both terrifying and instructive, and among the most fascinating intersections of myth and ritual are the harrowing journeys into the netherworld and the creatures associated with them. These beings were not merely elements of narrative, they were central to religious practice, protective rites, and the cultural understanding of life, death, and the afterlife. From demons that needed to be appeased to spirits called upon for protection, the myths and rituals of the Sumerians and Akkadians created a living, breathing cosmology in which monsters played essential roles. The underworld, or Kur, was imagined as a shadowy realm of permanence, where souls of the dead dwelled and where the normal rules of the living world did not apply. Guardians, demons, and monstrous entities patrolled its gates, and many myths describe journeys through this realm, whether undertaken by gods like Inanna or by humans in ritualized storytelling. These creatures, sometimes fearsome, sometimes ambiguous, served multiple purposes. They explained natural dangers, reinforced societal norms, and provided frameworks for ritual action. For instance, the presence of a demon like Namtar or Gala spirits in a text could signal the need for protective incantations or offerings to ensure safe passage through dangerous liminal spaces. One striking aspect of these myths is how monsters were integrated into ritual life. Lamashtu, who threatened mothers and infants, was countered by amulets depicting Pazuzu, whose grotesque form served as a protective talisman. Similarly, in rituals related to the underworld, priests would recite incantations, perform gestures, or use figurines to repel spirits or to guide deceased souls safely. Mythical creatures thus existed simultaneously as narrative characters and practical tools, bridging the gap between story and lived experience. The rituals transformed terror into agency, giving humans ways to navigate uncertainty and danger. Another dimension involves symbolic enactments of the underworld's creatures. In some temple practices, actors or figures representing monsters were used in processions or drama, illustrating the cyclical nature of life and death, chaos and order. These performances allowed communities to collectively confront fears, witness the containment of monstrous power, and reaffirm the protective presence of the gods. By visualizing and ritualizing monsters, people could integrate the unseen forces of the cosmos into comprehensible, manageable forms. The act of telling, depicting, or enacting these myths became a method of controlling anxiety and maintaining social and spiritual equilibrium. Certain creatures, such as the Gala demons, were considered agents of the underworld that could abduct or punish humans, particularly those who had transgressed divine law. Rituals involving these beings emphasized the necessity of appeasement and caution, teaching listeners that actions in the living world had consequences beyond death. Conversely, protective beings like the Mu or Lamassu were invoked to maintain boundaries, guarding homes, temples, and sacred spaces against the encroachment of chaotic forces. In this way, myths of monstrous creatures created a moral and spiritual geography, dangers were identified, and methods of mitigation were prescribed. The harrowing of the netherworld, when recounted in epic tales, is also psychologically resonant. The monsters represent internal as well as external threats, fear of death, uncertainty about the afterlife, and the unknown that lies beyond mortal experience. By envisioning these creatures as tangible adversaries, the myths provide a mechanism for coping with existential anxiety. The stories offer reassurance that with knowledge, ritual, and divine assistance, the dead can be honored, the living protected, and the cosmic balance preserved. For modern listeners or those hearing these myths in a bedtime storytelling format, the creatures of the netherworld can be presented with a gentle, reflective tone. Shadows of demons in distant halls, the faint glow of guardian figures at thresholds, or the whispering currents of subterranean rivers evoke suspense without terror. Imagining the narrative as a ritualized journey allows the listener to explore tension and resolution safely, guiding attention toward understanding and calm rather than fear. The monsters become part of a moral and cosmic lesson, that danger exists, but so do methods to navigate it, and that courage and preparation can mitigate even the most formidable threats. Moreover, these myths demonstrate the creativity and imagination of Mesopotamian culture. The monsters of the netherworld were not random, each had specific attributes, roles, and relationships to gods and humans. Their detailed descriptions, clawed hands, fiery eyes, serpentine bodies, or composite forms, reflect a sophisticated symbolic language. Every feature had meaning, whether warning of danger, illustrating divine power, or providing cues for ritual action. The interweaving of myth, ritual, and monster imagery reveals a culture deeply attuned to the interplay of order and chaos, life and death, seen and unseen. In essence, the harrowing of the netherworld and the monsters within it exemplify the dual function of myth, to entertain and to instruct. By framing dangerous forces as beings with distinct traits and intentions, Mesopotamians could engage with existential questions and daily risks in a structured, imaginative way. The narrative and ritual interplay allowed communities to face fear with knowledge, uncertainty with preparation, and death with reflection. These stories transform monstrous figures from sources of pure terror into guides for understanding the rhythms of life, the inevitability of mortality, and the enduring presence of divine and protective forces. In storytelling for sleep or quiet reflection, the netherworld's creatures assume a meditative, almost hypnotic quality. Their movements, voices, and interactions can be described slowly, with cadence and imagery that evoke attention yet encourage calm. Each monster, while formidable, is part of a broader cosmic order, reinforcing the idea that the universe, though complex and sometimes frightening, is navigable. Through myth, ritual, and imagination, listeners are reminded that even in shadowed realms, wisdom, protection, and balance prevail, making these tales both mesmerizing and soothing as they unfold in the quiet of night. The terrifying and wondrous creatures of Sumerian mythology have left an enduring mark, their forms and motifs echoing through centuries of storytelling across the ancient Near East and beyond. While some beasts were uniquely tied to Mesopotamian landscapes, rivers, and cultural contexts, many became archetypes, inspiring later civilizations such as the Babylonians, Assyrians, and even influencing Greek and Hittite mythologies. The legacy of these monsters extends beyond ancient texts, shaping symbolic language, religious practice, and the human imagination in ways that resonate even in modern interpretations of myth and legend. Sumerian dragons and serpents, including the mighty Ungulu, provided a foundation for later depictions of monstrous, serpentine guardians. The Akkadians and Babylonians adopted and adapted these forms, emphasizing horns, scaled bodies, and a fearsome presence while integrating them into new narratives, such as those of Marduk and Tiamat. Tiamat, a primordial chaos dragon in Babylonian myth, exhibits echoes of Ungulu's combination of serpentine form, regal menace, and association with primordial water. The battles between gods and these creatures symbolize the triumph of order over chaos, a theme that can be traced to heroic and divine confrontations in Sumerian epics. This continuity demonstrates how the Sumerians' conceptualization of monsters as cosmic agents influenced subsequent mythmaking, creating a visual and narrative vocabulary for terror, awe, and moral lessons. Similarly, the Lamassu, hybrid creatures with human, bird, and lion features, were inherited by the Assyrians and used extensively in architecture as guardians of palaces and temples. Their imposing, composite forms carried forward the Sumerian practice of assigning monsters a protective and liminal role, simultaneously terrifying and benevolent. Across Mesopotamia, these hybrid beasts communicated the dual nature of monsters, agents of divine power who could protect humans when correctly invoked yet remain capable of destruction if disrespected. The recurring motif of hybrid guardians underscores the cultural understanding that threats and protection were intertwined, a concept that influenced not only later Mesopotamian cultures but also decorative and symbolic art in the wider region. The moral and cosmological significance of Sumerian monsters also traveled through time. Beings such as Lamashtu and Pazuzu informed beliefs in protective and malevolent spirits in Babylonian and Assyrian rituals. Amulets, incantations, and charms against these forces were adopted and refined, demonstrating a continuity in religious practice and the enduring importance of mythic monsters in mediating daily fears. The conceptual framework, that supernatural threats could be countered by equal or greater supernatural forces, became a lasting paradigm for ritualized protection, influencing subsequent mythologies and magical traditions across the Near East and Mediterranean. Greek mythology, while culturally distinct, exhibits echoes of Sumerian monstrous archetypes. Consider the chimera, the hydra, or typhon, hybrid creatures, serpentine forms, and divine antagonists that bear remarkable conceptual similarity to Mesopotamian models. While separated by centuries and geographic distance, these Greek monsters reflect a shared human impulse to personify chaos, natural forces, and existential fears. Sumerian prototypes, transmitted through intermediary cultures like the Babylonians and Hittites, may have helped shape these enduring archetypes, demonstrating the long reach of early Mesopotamian imagination. Even in literary terms, Sumerian monsters influenced narrative structure and the hero's journey. Epic tales, such as the slaying of Humbaba or the confrontation with the Bull of Heaven, established enduring narrative patterns: a formidable adversary, a test of courage, divine intervention, and the consequences of victory or hubris. These patterns recur across cultures, emphasizing the role of monsters as both catalysts for heroism and symbols of cosmic law. The integration of fear, suspense, and moral reflection within these stories became a template for mythic storytelling, inspiring later epics from Babylonian, Hittite, and Greek traditions to medieval bestiaries and allegorical tales. The visual and artistic legacy of Sumerian monsters is equally significant. Cylinder seals, bas-reliefs, and temple decorations featuring dragons, hybrid beasts, and protective demons influenced iconography for centuries. Composite creatures adorned gateways, walls, and ritual objects, embedding the symbolism of monstrous power into the very fabric of civilization. Later cultures retained and elaborated on these designs, showing that Sumerian monsters were more than narrative devices. They were integral to cultural expression, communicating authority, protection, and cosmic order through imagery as well as story. From a modern perspective, the legacy of Sumerian beasts continues in literature, film, and fantasy art. Dragons, serpents, and hybrid guardians in contemporary media draw subconsciously on millennia-old archetypes that first appeared in Mesopotamian myth. The tension between fear and fascination, danger and protection, chaos and order, remains central to our engagement with monsters today. In this sense, Sumerian mythology has provided a foundational language for expressing human anxiety, ambition, and imagination across time. Finally, these creatures offer lessons in resilience and reflection. They remind us that myth is a tool for navigating the unknown, translating natural and existential threats into forms that can be confronted, understood, or ritualized. The Sumerians' monsters, with their complex moral, symbolic, and emotional dimensions, have become templates for thinking about human courage, vulnerability, and the limits of control. Their stories, whether of terror, protection, or transformation, continue to captivate and instruct, demonstrating the enduring power of imagination rooted in the earliest civilizations. In sum, the legacy of Sumerian beasts is profound and multilayered. Through narrative, ritual, and visual art, these creatures shaped the mythology, religious practice, and imagination of countless generations. They influenced neighboring cultures, contributed to the development of enduring archetypes, and continue to resonate in modern storytelling. From the terrifying Ungulu to the protective Lamassu, from demons of disease to heroic adversaries, Sumerian monsters established a symbolic vocabulary that transcends time, blending fear, awe, and reverence into tales that are as instructive as they are enchanting. Their echoes remind us that monsters are not merely obstacles or threats, they are mirrors of human experience, teaching us to confront danger, respect the unknown, and find meaning in the balance between chaos and order. As we reach the conclusion of our exploration into the terrifying and magnificent creatures of Sumerian mythology, it becomes clear that these beasts were more than simple figures of fear. They were intricate reflections of human experience, natural forces, and divine order. From the hulking Humbaba guarding the cedar forest to the celestial bull of heaven, from Inanna's harrowing journey into the underworld to the serpentine majesty of Ungulu, each creature embodies lessons about courage, ambition, mortality, and the delicate balance between chaos and order. Their stories, vivid and dramatic, provide a lens through which the ancient Mesopotamians interpreted the world around them, blending wonder with caution and awe with respect. One of the enduring qualities of these myths is their capacity to serve multiple functions simultaneously. They are heroic tales, chronicling the feats of kings and gods, moral fables, emphasizing the consequences of hubris and the importance of humility, and allegorical lessons, symbolizing natural and psychological forces. Humbaba, for instance, represents the untamed wilderness and the tension between human ambition and divine limits, while the Bull of Heaven illustrates the destructive potential of anger and the inescapable consequences of provoking higher powers. Even the monsters of the underworld or the river serpents like Ungulu are not merely external threats, they mirror human fears and societal challenges, creating a rich tapestry of meaning for listeners and practitioners alike. These creatures also reflect a deep awareness of the interconnectedness of life, death, and the cosmos. Inanna's descent, the struggles against divine beasts, and the rituals involving protective demons all convey the idea that every action has consequences, that life is fragile, and that balance is essential. The myths teach that courage and wisdom are necessary not only for survival but for thriving within a complex and often unpredictable world. By confronting these monsters, whether literally in story, symbolically in ritual, or psychologically in reflection, ancient Mesopotamians navigated uncertainty and cultivated resilience. Another striking aspect of Sumerian beasts is their influence on imagination and culture, extending far beyond their original context. Their forms, narratives, and symbolic roles influenced subsequent civilizations, from Babylonian and Assyrian mythology to Greek and Hittite traditions. The archetypes established by Sumerian monsters, the protective hybrid, the serpentine chaos bringer, the divine adversary, continue to resonate in modern storytelling, literature, and art. They remind us that human fascination with monstrous forms is universal, serving as both entertainment and a framework for understanding fear, power, and morality. From a narrative perspective, these myths are particularly well-suited to reflective, immersive storytelling. The tension between dread and wonder, the interplay of light and shadow, the rhythm of action and contemplation, all create a calming yet captivating experience for the listener. In the context of bedtime or meditative storytelling, the monsters of Sumerian mythology can be reframed as archetypes of challenge and transformation rather than sources of terror. They become guides through imagination, encouraging reflection on courage, empathy, and the cycles of life and death. The pacing of these myths, rising action, suspense, confrontation, and resolution, mirrors the ebb and flow of thought and emotion, making them ideal for calming, immersive narration. Finally, the enduring lesson of Sumerian beasts lies in their ability to embody the complex and paradoxical nature of existence. They are fearsome yet instructive, destructive yet protective, alien yet intimately connected to human experience. By studying these myths, we gain insight into how ancient people understood their environment, their societies, and themselves. We also recognize the timelessness of these themes, the tension between ambition and limitation, the negotiation with forces beyond our control, and the necessity of courage, reflection, and reverence in navigating life's uncertainties. As we close this exploration, it is worth imagining the Sumerian landscape at twilight, the cedar forest silent after Humbaba's fall, the Tigris rippling with the unseen coils of Ungulu, the gates of the underworld guarding secrets and lessons, and the divine eyes of gods and goddesses watching over human affairs. The monsters, in all their complexity, are not simply figures of myth, they are companions in reflection, embodiments of challenge, and mirrors of the human spirit. Their stories endure, not only in ancient texts and archaeological depictions but also in our imagination, offering calm contemplation, moral insight, and the quiet thrill of encountering the extraordinary. In the stillness of night, the echoes of Sumerian beasts whisper across millennia, inviting us to dream, to reflect, and to remember that the world is vast, mysterious, and full of both danger and wonder, and that courage, wisdom, and humility remain our timeless guides.